All right, I'm starting to see the entries slow down a bit. We have a very large group today because of our joint meeting, so very excited to get this group together. And thank you to both Brian and Austin for coordinating on this. My name is Jason Keller. I am the chair of the Economic Development Committee here at CMAP, and very excited to be the sort of the host and chair for this discussion. We'll plan on running these meetings the same way that we normally do, with some mixed business up front, but excited to see the agenda and the different levels of conversation we have planned for you this morning. So as of 9:31, we will go ahead and call this meeting to order. And with our standard disclaimer since the beginning of the year, as permitted by the Governor's Disaster Declaration of January 8th, 2021, the determination has been made that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent for these committees. To ensure that the meeting is as transparent as possible, we will post the meeting materials approximately 1 week in advance, provide a recording of this meeting linked on our website, and we'll take all substantive votes by roll call. And again, because we do have such a large group, we ask that if you are not speaking, please keep your screen on mute, or if you are on the phone, please mute yourself as well. If there are comments or questions, feel free to chime in. I think the CMAP staff will help me sort of monitor all the different screens and faces that are happening here. But yes, we're trying to make this as much of a regular type meeting as we can. So again, this is the Joint Economic Development and Environment and Natural Resources Committees. Again, my name is Jason Keller with the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, and excited to be a part of this. So with that, we will go right into Austin with agenda changes and any announcements. Austin, the floor is yours.
No announcements at the moment, and as you can see from the agenda, we are trying our best to hold a joint meeting virtually, but otherwise I think we should be able to stick to schedule today. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Our next agenda item will be approval of minutes for the Environment and Natural Resources Committee from both, from January 7th, 2021, and then we'll move on to the Economic Development Committee meetings, meeting minutes from January 25th. So Brian, why don't we start with you?
Great, thanks, Jason. So for members of the Environment and Natural Resources Committee, we'll be beginning with approval of the minutes from our January meeting. What we're going to do, like we've done in the past, is sort of combine a roll call with the minutes approval. And as a bit of a way to introduce ourselves to the Economic Development Committee, what I'll ask is, when I read your name, if you could respond with your name, your title, the organization you represent, and your vote on the minutes. So could we start with a motion to approve the minutes?
So
This is
moved.
Martha.
Oh.
And a second from Martha Dooley.
And that was Sean Wydell moving.
Great, thank you. So proceeding with the roll call, Jack Darren.
Good morning, everyone. Jack Darren, co-chair Environment and Natural Resources. I'm the director of the Sierra Club Illinois chapter. I vote aye.
And Sean Wydell.
Hi, Sean Wydell with the Chicago Department of Transportation, and I'm also co-chair of the ENR committee, and I also vote aye.
Thank you. Lindsay Burt.
Hi, this is Dr. Lindsay Burt on the phone. I'm a client solutions manager for Xylem, residing in the Chicagoland area, and I also approve the minutes today.
Carrie Cragen.
Hi, this is Carrie Cragen with US EPA Region 5. I'm a Brownfields project manager, and I approve of the minutes.
Martha Dooley.
This is Martha Dooley, landscape and sustainability planner for the Village of Schaumburg. I recommend approval of the minutes.
Aaron Dernbaugh.
Morning, my name is Aaron Dernbaugh. I'm Loyola University Chicago's Director of Sustainability, and I vote aye.
Elena Grossman.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elena Grossman, and I am the Brace, Illinois Program Director at the UIC School of Public Health, and I approve the minutes.
Andrew Hawkins.
I'm Andrew Hawkins, Director of Planning and Development with the Forest Preserve District of Will County, and I approve the minutes.
Paul May.
Good morning, I'm Paul May, Executive Director with the Northwest Suburban Municipal Joint Action Water Agency, a regional water wholesaler selling water to about 500,000 people in Northwest Cook County. Happy to be here, and I approve the minutes.
Stacy Myers.
Hi, my name is Stacy Myers, Senior Counsel with Open Lands, and I'm with the Environment and Natural Resources Committee. I vote aye on the minutes.
Ted Penesis.
I am Ted Penesis. Good morning, everyone. I am Director of Community Outreach for the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, and I approve of the minutes.
Tom Rickert.
Hi, I'm Tom Rickert. I'm the Chief of Staff at Kane County Division of Transportation, and I approve the minutes.
Vanessa Ruiz.
Hi, this is Vanessa Ruiz, Environmental Studies here at Environmental Studies Unit Head at IDOT District 1, and I have no comments to the minutes.
Deborah Stone.
Hi, Deborah Stone. I'm Director of the Cook County Department of Environment and Sustainability, and I vote aye.
All right, and that is a perfect attendance for the ENR committee. So thank you all very much for being here on this Monday morning, which isn't even our normal morning. So thank you all.
Great. Thank you very much. And Austin, why don't we go to economic development?
Brian's over here trying to show us up at our own meeting. So as Brian said, we are going to do a similar process for the Economic Development Committee. I'll read out the names, please share your name, title, and organization, and how you vote on the minutes. Can I hear a motion to approve the minutes?
This is Brian Gay, so moved.
A second.
Second, Considine.
Thank you, Kevin. So we'll start off with Jason Keller.
Jason Keller, Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, vote aye.
Dion Bowe.
Dion Bowe with the National Main Street Center, vote aye.
Mari Castaldi.
Hi, this is Mari Castaldi, Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Chicago Jobs Council, and I approve the minutes.
Lisa Richmond.
Morning, Lisa Castillo Richmond from the Partnership for College Completion. Approved minutes.
Kevin Considine.
This is Kevin Considine, the President of Lake County Partners Economic Development Organization, and I approve the minutes.
Peter Kretikos.
Peter Kretikos, President, Institute for Work in the Economy, and I vote aye.
Christy De Laurentiis.
Hi, good morning. Christy De Laurentiis with the South Suburban Mayors and Managers Association, voting aye.
Sochi Flores. Irene, do you want to vote for Sochi?
Yeah, hi everybody. It's Irene Scher, Deputy Bureau Chief with Cook County Bureau of Economic Development, and I vote aye on behalf of Sochi Flores, Bureau of Economic Development.
Thanks, Irene. John Furr.
Hi, this is John Furr, Executive Director of Education Systems Center at NIU, and I vote aye.
Brian Gay.
Hi, this is Brian Gay, President and CEO of Invest Aurora, and I vote aye.
Terrence Hall. I think he's able to make it. Emily Harris. Michael Horstein.
Good morning, Michael Horstein, Manager of Local Planning with the Regional Transportation Authority, and I vote aye.
Gretchen Kleiner.
Doug Pryor with Will County Center for Economic Development, aye.
Kevin Kramer.
This is Kevin Kramer with the Village of Hoffman Estates. I'm the Director of Economic Development, and I vote aye as well.
Marissa Lewis.
Hi, yes, I'm Marissa Lewis from the Chicago Cook Workforce Partnership. I'm the Board Liaison and Chief Policy Officer, and aye.
Tony Lusenko.
Tony Lusenko with the Elgin Development Group, and I vote aye.
Jonathan McGee. Kathleen Nelson. Henry Pierce.
Good morning, everyone. Henry Pierce with ComEd's Economic and Workforce Development Team, and I vote aye.
Lance Pressel. and Jennifer Tamman. Okay, I think that does it for the Economic Development Committee. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thanks everyone for making that process as smooth as we possibly could. So now being 9:41, let's move on to CMAP board updates.
Thanks. So we have a few updates to share from the March CMAP board meeting. The first is on the equitable engagement program. At the March meeting, the CMAP board approved a proposal to help advance our work on equity. We will be bringing on a consultant to help develop a pilot program to address the challenges of engaging community stakeholders who are representative of the region's diversity. CMAP strives to cultivate a broadly inclusive process for incorporating stakeholder input into its plans and programs through our committees, as well as special purpose groups formed on specific projects. And while the agency has been successful over the years enlisting and retaining representatives from the region's institutions and units of governments to participate in these groups, it could improve its ability to identify, recruit, and sustain engagement from a greater number of nonprofit and grassroots partners that are representative of the region's diversity. So together with a consultant that's being recruited through this process, CMAP will design a pilot program to address the challenges of inclusive engagement and work towards a more robust, meaningful engagement with nonprofit and grassroots stakeholders going forward. We expect to have an update again in the summer and aim to have a pilot program developed within the year. We also have an update on the call for projects. Through the 2021 call for planning assistance, CMAP will be assisting dozens of communities with long-term planning projects. CMAP selected these communities following a joint call for planning assistance with the RTA, with a focus on providing assistance to high-need communities. Selected planning projects span northeastern Illinois from Waukegan in northern Lake County to Robbins in southern Cook County. In Robbins, for example, CMAP staff will work with local officials to strengthen their community development capacity and implement past planning recommendations to address flooding issues to spur economic development and create new opportunities for recreation. The communities of Berkeley, Harvey, Lamont, and Morton Grove will learn more about creative uses for public spaces that have developed since the start of the pandemic, such as open streets, outdoor dining in the public way, and pop-up markets. Overall, CMAP received requests for assistance from 27 high and very high need communities. CMAP will be able to provide support to 22 of those communities. We have an update on transportation analysis. As the pandemic continues to affect transportation patterns, we recently updated our analysis with data through January. Traffic on Illinois roads is still lower than the previous year as a result of the pandemic, although a significant rebound has happened since it began. CMAP's latest analysis shows a decrease in traffic volumes across all vehicle classes, including commercial vehicles, within the past few months. The recent decline in traffic volume is likely the result of mitigation efforts that were put into place as COVID-19 cases began to surge in late fall. We will continue to monitor transportation patterns and volumes, and we'll have another update to report in a few months. And lastly, on the fines, fares, and fees report, we are also wrapping up a new report on how fines, fares, and fees adversely affect low-income people. The report includes a set of recommendations on how we can make our transportation system more equitable. The report is expected to be released in mid-April. And there should be some more on all of these, including some presentations that were made if you want to look at the materials from the last board meeting.
All right, any comments or questions for Brian? Okay, hearing none, seeing none from the floor, we'll be moving on to the legislative agenda.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Anthony Safali. I work for Gordon Smith here in the Government Affairs Group, and I know Tim McMahon, our Federal Affairs person, is here on the line as well. Thanks for having me. I always enjoy meeting with these committees, talking about our state legislative work, as well as all the stuff that you are all working on. I just want to go over very briefly what we are up to, and then we're going to have opportunities for questions and stuff at the end. As in years past, CMAP has developed a legislative agenda and a number of other supporting documents in order to move policy conversations forward at the state level and attempt to implement key Onto 2050 recommendations. The legislative agenda for the 102nd Illinois General Assembly is the agency's policy-driven implementation document, which we use to pursue these recommendations. In conjunction, we've developed two other documents that are more reactive in their scope, and these include the transportation funding principles, which allow us to consider new transportation revenue proposals, as well as the Onto 2050 legislative framework, which recasts the regional plan in legislative language. Very briefly, I'm going to walk through the legislative agenda, and as many of you are already aware of these recommendations, and they've only really changed to accommodate COVID-19, as well as some advances in our policy work and accomplishments at the state level. The agenda really focuses on constrained resources and how that affects the communities in our region as they seek to achieve their unique quality of life goals. And it also focuses on tools that we need to carry out our state mandate as the region's comprehensive planning organization in the MPO. Our initiatives include funding for all comprehensive regional planning activities, which includes funding outside of the road fund that CMAP can use for critical environment and economic development work. We're also seeking to collect and provide data necessary for decision-making and accountability. This means more and better tools for planning, especially as CMAP begins work around travel safety and mobility and economic recovery. We also want more data at the regional scale, such as data from TNCs, to better understand how to incorporate the service into planning. Tied to the fines, fares, and fees presentation, we are looking for reforms to tax policy to strengthen communities, and finally, enhance transportation revenues through user fees, which include a road usage charge, congestion pricing, as well as local authority to raise revenues. Very briefly, session is proceeding. We are watching all of these things, tracking legislation, analyzing it, and we will continue to update CMAP board and committees on progress. I'm happy to take any questions that anyone may have at the end of this presentation, but I will conclude my remarks now and move along to my colleague, Tim. Tim?
Thanks, Anthony. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tim McMahon. I work on our federal affairs here at CMAP, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to just run through a few parts of our federal agenda that are relevant specifically to these two committees, and then I'll go briefly over what we're tracking in Congress right now. So I just want to provide a brief overview, like I said, of what's within our federal agenda. So we've broken it down by first principles for COVID relief this year, and then we have sections of recommendations for surface transportation reauthorization, and then we go into recommendations for climate and the environment, improving data transparency at the federal level, promoting affordable housing policy, and improving economic and workforce growth to advance equity. So beginning real briefly with the COVID relief principles, one of the main priorities, which actually just happened with the passage of the American Rescue Plan, is additional fiscal relief across all levels of government in the form of direct state and local aid, which I'm sure you all are very aware of. The principles also asked for continued and increased support for transit, which was also in there. So we were encouraged to see both of those in that relief bill that just passed on March 11th. So within the surface transportation reauthorization section of the agenda, we call for increased funding and dedicated funding for MBOs to measure and address greenhouse gas emissions coming from the transportation sector. We also call for increased funding for electric vehicle infrastructure charging as well, and expanded eligibility for programs that address resilience and better and having our existing surface transportation assets to be able to better withstand extreme weather events or natural disasters. Also, we have a section on, as I mentioned, addressing climate change and protecting our region's water and natural resources. Here we're calling for expanded grant or low interest loan funding opportunities through established grant programs and loan programs that maintain and upgrade water and wastewater infrastructure. We call for making investments in our energy infrastructure for things like making the electric grid more flexible and decentralized, as well as modernizing policies related to flooding, including reforming the National Flood Insurance Program to develop long-term solutions for properties that suffer repetitive losses or are at a higher risk of flooding. Switching over to economic development and our recommendation for improving economic and workforce growth. Specific recommendations there include increased funding for reemployment, skilling, and reskilling programs authorized in WIOA, ensuring federal investments are comprehensive and strategic through increased regional economic coordination, so a lot of that EDA funding that flows to the region, and expanding federal funding opportunities for regional programs, specifically grant programs that have already catalyzed regional or cross-county programs like the Chicago Metal Consortium or Digital Manufacturing and Design Innovation Institute, now known as MXD. We have and will continue to use this agenda in the coming months for our virtual DC meetings with our congressional delegation and throughout this coming year as the next surface transportation reauthorization and other major legislative packages are being considered. And now, speaking of that, I just want to briefly go over what we're hearing in Congress right now. So as I mentioned earlier, we were encouraged to see provisions for direct state and local aid in the bill, as well as transit funding. We are still in the process of reviewing and breaking down that bill. It was pretty large, and we'll continue to monitor it as it gets implemented, especially for regional impacts. Lastly, we've been in regular contact with our congressional delegation as surface transportation reauthorization continues to heat up at a pretty fast pace this month. The Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, the committee that usually takes the lead on these bills, has indicated it would like to have the portion of its bill out of committee by Memorial Day. We've also seen that hearings for the bill have already started happening in most of the authorizing committees, and there will be additional hearings for member priorities, also known as the potential return of earmarks in this process. So there are hearings for both of those things coming up throughout this coming month, so March and April. So this is something we'll be actively monitoring and engaging with the delegation on as Congress considers this bill ahead of the expiration of FAST Act at the end of September. And with that, we will open it up to any questions you may have on the state or federal side. And I know we'd also like to hear what priorities your organizations may have with all of this legislative craziness going on right now. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Any questions for Anthony or for Tim?
Jason, it's Christy DeLaurentis. I have a question for Anthony on the state side. I have two questions, actually, if I can ask about on the state side.
Go ahead.
So I saw the legislative agenda, and specifically on tax policy, there was a statement that calls for reforms to criteria that the state uses to direct revenues to local government. Just to clarify, I represent the South Suburban Mayors and Managers Association. We're 45 municipalities in the South Suburbs. So I did not see any sort of detail about what reforms are necessary and what you're proposing, what CMAP is actually advocating for in terms of any of the change on how distributions from the state move to municipalities. So can you just speak to that?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question, Christy. We are looking to have a conversation around those criteria, and we're looking to have a conversation in general. Ultimately, those are the sorts of things that we think are important for CMAP to begin to engage in, but ultimately we want to be hearing from local governments about what they need, and it has to be a broader conversation with the state. We are seeking to open up that conversation. We do not have specific recommendations about those changes, but we hope to develop more over time, working with all of you.
Okay, so please keep me informed of that. And obviously SSMMA would want to be involved in that. We have some of the most challenged communities within Illinois. So we definitely be interested in having a conversation and providing any sort of inputs that could be helpful. And then
Absolutely.
The second question that I had was related to transportation revenues. You're proposing a statewide pilot, but it sounds like what you're looking to do is really have an implementation plan for that because of the statement about the road usage charge that will become necessary. So how specific is there legislation that you're looking at now? Have you started to identify what corridor would be the pilot or any of the details around that priority?
We have no specificity, and there is not specific legislation. We just know that looking at MFT, as well as the increase in fuel efficiency that we are projecting out to 2050, we have to start having a conversation around what a road usage charge could look like in Illinois. We do have a couple of policy updates that look at different scenarios, and I'd be happy to share those. But we really need to work with our partners at IDOT and other organizations to think about this transition. We do think a pilot makes the most sense in Illinois as things stand right now. And we, like with your previous question, we are happy to work towards drawing up a more detailed plan, but we do want to begin that conversation around getting everyone on the same page that we need to move this conversation forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Christy.
Tim?
Hi, yes, Dr. Lee Burt from Xylem. Just had a quick question on the federal side. You mentioned reviewing and providing recommendations with regards to the water, wastewater, I believe, infrastructure. You mentioned the kind of a low interest bill. Can you expound upon that a little bit more? I know American Society of Civil Engineers just released their annual report again on infrastructure. I think we're at a C or C minus. Can you speak a little bit to that and how it relates to maybe CMAP's recommendations, particularly for Chicago area?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So sorry, I just want to make sure I was off mute. So specifically with that recommendation, and especially as we look towards surface transportation reauthorization, I know that with our home state senator Tammy Duckworth, water infrastructure is one of her main priorities. It's been one of her big priorities, and it sounds like that'll be her big push. And she is now chair of the subcommittee within Senate EPW, Environment and Public Works, that would craft that part of the bill. So in terms of specific programs or legislation, with specific programs that are currently out there that we talk about, and we have these examples more in the federal agenda. I just wanted to give more of an overview, but that includes, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund Partnership, WIFIA funding. So any of those loan programs where either we can add, some flexibility or new potential programs that may address, lead in our pipes, or or just stormwater or wastewater. All of this infrastructure that's going to cost quite a bit, as you all know, we are monitoring that. And so with that specifically, there is no specific bill that we are looking at just because of the nature of the federal process, but we'll be monitoring it as it goes through that subcommittee, and we'll be keeping an eye on it. So if there is anything specific in that area, feel free to shoot me an email if there are specific things that you're looking at as well, or offer them right now. But that's kind of where we're looking in terms of the process as reauthorization comes up.
Hey, Tony.
Yeah, I will follow up. I'm also active in NACWA, National Association of Clean Agencies, and so there's some initiative there, really proactive on it as well. I think it would be good to align on. So yeah, I definitely will follow up.
Great.
Tim, do we have time for more questions on this or in the agenda? I guess one thing I wanted to maybe flag for the CMAP and its legislative agenda is something that the county board chairs have supported previously, which is the Defense Manufacturing Community Support Program, and was funded last year again. And so the state actually applied last year, was not successful, There's going to be another opportunity, and I think there'll be some effort to apply, but there's also a need to support reauthorization of funds for the next year. And so the American Manufacturing Community Collectives are working to recommend $50 million. And I can send you a letter, but we'd love to see if CMAP can help support all this. Over the past 2 years, both Senator Duckworth and Urban have been very supportive as well.
Great. Yeah. No, I would be happy to talk to you about that one specifically offline, Irene, just to go through what's in the letter and just timeline there.
Okay, I'll follow up.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
I see Stacy Myers had something she wanted to ask.
Thank you. Tony, thanks for the update. I was wondering 2 things, please. One, is there a bill tracker that CMAP has that we can look at as to the state and Fed bills that you guys are either tracking or working on? That's one.
Hey, Stacy, it's Anthony. We use ILGA just like everybody else to have a roster of bills, and I can share some of that with you if you'd like to offline.
That'd be great. The second is we're seeing as someone who's working on the state and national level on climate change, 30 by 30, water infrastructure, and a number of interrelated items. What we're seeing is basically a separation of all these priorities, which is causing Illinois and built environments to basically lose out on combined funding. And what we would love to see, and if we could work with you all on, is justification, and we're starting to do this by basically showing their interrelated pillars, like IPCC in the UN, right? That biodiversity, resiliency, carbon sequestration, and sustainable agriculture are all related in our state, and we can't piecemeal them apart, right? So that we could build stronger funding for all of our ecosystems and all of our underserved communities, right, in a holistic way. Because right now I'm seeing maps coming out for 30 by 30 that completely leave Illinois out because of the bifurcation of priorities. And I was wondering if you're experiencing the same thing and how you guys are handling it.
Tim, you can feel free to jump in here with your stuff, but I am not, what we are working on is not super focused on that at this moment. So I think perhaps you and I should talk a little bit more about that going forward.
I think you would be of tremendous help because I think the more that we can show that our built environments are absolutely essential parts of any solution, the more that we will have equal funding flow to our needs, which are real in places like the Calumet, in places that are on the collar counties, where we have significant resources that contribute to a solution that are getting overlooked.
Thanks for that, Stacy. I will follow up.
All right. Just in the interest of time, I think we do need to move forward. I think if there are further questions on that, feel free to reach out to CMAP directly, and they can schedule some time to go over more details. So thank you so much for that. Moving forward on our agenda, we're lucky enough to have Dr. Janet Smith and Sean Connolly from UIC come to talk to us today. So Dr. Smith and Mr. Connolly, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much, and thanks for having us this morning. We have a little bit of time here to talk to you about some of the work that we're doing through our U.S. Economic Development Administration University Center, which focuses on green economic development. And so I will kind of introduce our work, and Sean will take you through one part, and then I will come back and close up. So could I have the next slide, please? So this is our agenda. We're going to first talk about brownfield redevelopment and the tool that we've developed, and I'm very excited about how it's moving forward. And then I'm going to talk about some emerging work on clean energy opportunities for economic and racial equity. If we have time, we might get so many questions about the brownfield tool that if we don't get to that next, I can follow up with email to you all. Next slide, please. So some of you may know about our US EDA University Center. University centers are given 5-year grants, small grants, but effective, we think, to work on different economic development strategies and projects, in particularly focusing on research and technical assistance. In our case, our EDA Center, we proposed focusing on green economic development, and with the idea of promoting the green economy and the growth of it in the Chicago metro region, and through different strategies. So we started out with assessing the ecosystem back in 2017 when we first launched. We started doing some deeper dives into different aspects of the green economy, particularly looking at some things that are considered strengths. Food and food production and distribution is one. Also looking at issues around the brownfields themselves, which is not always seen as a strength, but maybe a deficit. But the idea is that those sites can also become incredible resources for our, particularly for the South Cook County area. We're focusing a lot on the Calumet area in the geography. And also then clean energy, which is obviously an area of growth potential. We also relate this to workforce development, as well as developing some case studies. As an example, we did some work with ICNC when they launched the hatchery a couple of years ago, and looking at understanding the workforce needs and for that venture, as well as from the community which they're trying to target and serve. Site inventory, which is you're going to hear about the brownfield tool, really was an idea of looking at brownfields, and we evolved very quickly with our partnership with Calumet Collaborative into creating a tool which is much stronger than an inventory. So we'll use that to talk about that. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Sean Connolly, who is a research associate at our center. Thanks.
Morning, everybody. Am I able to share my screen?
Austin, you got that? Yeah.
Yes, you should be able to now.
Okay. Great. I think that worked.
Yeah.
Yep. Fantastic. Thanks, everybody. I'm just going to provide a brief overview of the kymet reinvestment mapping tool. Just to get everyone oriented, this is what the site looks like upon landing. So once we click through this disclaimer, you have your navigational controls in the upper left to move around the map. We also have a sidebar here on the left that provides some basic information about the tool, about Calumet Collaborative as an organization. This tool is really made to advance sustainable development throughout the Calumet region. There's contact information for Sarah Coulter and the folks at Calumet Collaborative as well. There is also a tab here for data sources. So by layer, users can see the agency, the actual raw source link, as well as when the data was downloaded and last updated. On the right here, sorry, just got to move. Go to meeting. On the right here, we have our layer control. And so this allows users to turn on or off a variety of overlays, everything from brownfield sites defined at the federal and state level, economic incentive zones. We also have zoning and land use information, environmental features, as well as a social vulnerability index. For today, I'm just going to use Blue Island, Illinois, which is a city in South Cook County along the Kymet River, for folks not familiar with it, as an example of how this tool can be used. So we can search the city or even a specific street address using the lookup in the upper left. So I can just search Blue Island, and then the map will zoom in to that particular area of interest. And here we can really start to use these overlay layers to investigate these sites. So I'm going to turn on some of the environmental layers here, particularly the wetlands, as well as the 100-year floodplain. And we can see once those are on that there's a number of sites here that are close to the river, as well as these flood-prone areas. I'm thinking particularly about some of these EPA designated brownfield sites along Broadway Street, as well as some leaking underground storage tanks farther down the river. And from here, we turn on down the river land use layer. We can really see that there's a close proximity of residential land use as well as open space. And actually, the relatively new CalSag bike trail runs right through this section of Blue Island. So given all those factors, perhaps these are sites that are best used for environmental reuse or remediation. If we focus on some other layers, so I'm just going to turn off the land use as well as the environmental and really turn on some of our economic incentives and just call your attention to downtown Blue Island. So there's a cluster of sites here that qualify for new market tax credits, and they also fall within an opportunity zone, which is the yellow hash overlay. And so you can see these sites, east of Western Ave, particularly along Gregory Street, that really have some attractive financing options. And if we turn on zoning, we can see that these sites, these parcels in particular, are already zoned for commercial use. So given those financing options, the existing zoning, the location to downtown and the Metro Electric station, perhaps these are brownfield sites that are really ideal for mixed use redevelopment or TOD projects. So this was just a short example of how different actors can use this wide variety of data at the tips of their fingers to really compare and contrast for sites throughout the region. And I think Jan and I are definitely interested to hear how this tool could be of use to you and your organizations. And happy to take any questions either now or at the conclusion of our presentation. But yeah, that's it for me. I'm going to give it back to Janet.
Yeah, I definitely want to, we have some time for some questions on this, and it was clearly a quick run through of this project. Just to give you a background, this came out of a brownfield committee that the Calumet Collaborative convened, and some of you folks who are on this call, I know were from your agencies were participating. And I will say that it was an interesting process bringing together folks from the economic development side, who are looking more at redevelopment of real estate, and comparing sort of different positions when bringing together people from looking at environmental concerns, and not always saying they have to disagree, but you can have differences of how you look at this, how you even label something a brownfield. So we were very mindful of using data, first of all, that everyone could agree on, and data that's publicly sourced. We also, as Sean can talk more detail, but in terms of the design even of the tool, it's something that can be sustained by an organization such as Calumet Collaborative, which really we've kind of turned it over to for their work. But at the end of this, after a long process, we feel very good about, in terms of the different interests and stakeholders' concerns were addressed. And it's obviously going to keep evolving. I know I saw a note for an addition layer that someone mentioned, and please send those to us. We're always looking for that. And obviously updating information as it becomes available, knowing that you can't update every day, but there's certain things that we want to make sure we keep up to date. So if there are any questions, I'm not used to, GoToMeeting that much, so I'm not sure where we'd see questions come up or if hands are raised. So maybe Tony or somebody could manage that part. And if not, we can go on to the other part and save some time at the end for both items. What do you suggest?
It looks like there was a comment in the chat from Stacy. Stacy, would you just like to go through your comment?
Oh, they're there. Yes, thanks.
Sure. Through the Prairie State Conservation Coalition, which is an Illinois consortium of a number of land trusts, throughout Illinois, as well as conservation organizations. They have a tool called iView that basically is continuously updated by one individual who's a saint, who's been doing this for years. And he literally nags all of us as soon as we have an easement in place, for instance, to get him the legal description and the deed. He's phenomenal. So that source has and is going to be updated continually. All of the public and private protected lands in our state, and may be a valuable addition to the environmental layer or the open space layer.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That sounds great.
Yeah, so we can be in touch with you, Stacy, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about it and also how you can connect us with that. That'd be great.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Yeah, I think that the main thing too for us is that we want to have information that is reliable, and our view of it is, however, this sounds like we have to make sure the saint, as you called him or her, is sustained. But that's the idea, is that we want to try and find things. We know that everything is not permanent, but if we can find things that are reliable sources and that can be updated, that'd be great. So this sounds wonderful.
Yeah, I have a feeling even if we lose that saint, then another one will step in. So
saints are needed. Thank you. Anything else? One thing we wanted to offer up too is that there may be groups on here where you may have ideas and questions, and one-on-ones or with your organization, we'd be glad to set up a Zoom meeting or some sort of event that we could talk through and work on more, kind of deeper dive around questions that you may want to formulate. Because the best thing about a tool is getting used, right? So as an example, I know MWRD has used this tool or is using this tool to identify research sites for their biomass or research. And so that's something I think is really interesting. And so, just there's a lot of interesting things that this tool can be used for, and we're hoping people use it widely. Well, if there's no other questions on this tool, and you can keep putting them in the chat, and we can always follow up afterwards, why don't I turn over to the next section? So if you can go back to screen, and I think you can zoom through a couple slides there to the clean energy opportunity slide, whoever's controlling it. Terrific. Thank you, Tony. Yeah, so, yeah, great. Okay. So the other thing, obviously clean energy is really critical, especially now we're looking at changes in the administration at the federal level that's really promoting this. Obviously things before that were changing in our state. And so anticipating that, some of those changes, but also recognizing just in general where things were going, we wanted to do some analysis of clean energy, both from the job side, but also from the production side. If you go to the next slide, please. I'm going to focus on, obviously, where we're kind of thinking about it from the workforce development side. So to kind of show a tool that we're trying to work out, we call it some widgets. But so as you know, the CEJA, or the Clean Energy Job Act, is moving forward in the State House, which we're really all excited about. And it has a lot of ambition here, which is great. And so what we were thinking about is how can we, as our center, provide some information that could be useful in that, in implementing CEJA, but the positive thoughts that it'll pass. Next slide, please. Our work has been focusing on what we call looking at in the framework of just transition, which is obviously, as it's quoted here, an intentional shift towards a society in which the economy and the environment can thrive simultaneous, with social structures in place to make sure equity takes priority in the process as well as the outcome. The report cover on this side, I realize I put the old report cover on, it's actually just came out in January of 2021, is a report that we did looking at, it's actually replicates at our geography, a national study that the Brookings Institute did back in 2019, I think, that tried to look at not just estimating where we were at in terms of the clean energy workforce and through occupations, but also understanding it in terms of the entities that were actually employing people, looking at wages, and then connecting it to data on race, ethnicity, and gender. Because what we are concerned about, and what they were concerned about, is that there seems to be a lack of inclusion of people of color and women in this field. And unfortunately, the study at the national level and our study itself also shows that, or kind of confirms it. But what it does is it gives a basis for us to move forward and say, what can we do about it? We purposely left conclusions out of this report as to recommendations for what can go forward, because right now we're in we're just starting a listening session and sets of sessions, and we'd love to, if there's anyone on this call who'd like to talk to us, is that we would like to talk about like what recommendations might be needed or would help in moving forward towards this end of inclusion for people of color and women in this field. Next slide. And so that's what we're going to be embarking on. But what we have done is to kind of think about how do we look at the workforce development question. And so a report that came out, it's an annual report, the 2020 U.S. Energy and Employment Report, looked at Illinois, like they do these reports by state, and 3 findings they got from talking to employers in Illinois in terms of getting people into energy work is the lack of experience, training, or technical skills. These are not surprising findings, by the way. A small applicant pool and competition, and the third point about it, insufficient non-technical skills. And so all 3 of those things really, lean towards how do we think about workforce development. And I will say, first of all, we are not workforce development experts, but we're trying to provide data as we understand it that could be useful for people in that field. So this is why feedback is really important. So you can go to the next slide. What we're doing now is building off of ONET, if people are familiar with this data source, which brings together a lot of detailed data for a lot of different jobs. And in the case of green jobs, they did have for a while, I think it's disappeared again off the site, jobs that they flagged as green. And so that way, if you were interested in looking at what a job, if you're a job seeker, for example, you could look on there and find information about a green job. And so here's an example. I know it's small, but it's about specific to solar photovoltaic installers, so people installing solar. We wanted to take this information and make it a little bit more digestible, comparable, and useful. It's very good data, but it's a little wonky to work with. We had done a project, as I mentioned earlier, with ICNC, and we did a similar thing where we took the data from ONETs and kind of simplified it, not losing detail as much as just kind of focusing on some key things that people need to understand or think about, and made a way for people to kind of look across different occupations. In that case, it was around food production. In this case, now we're looking at with green jobs. And so we've kind of pulled the data from behind the ONET screen and put it together into these simple widgets, as they're called. I'm learning the lingo of the kids, people. So if you turn to the next slide, I'm doing this as a demo, not as a live demo, but just to kind of show you a screen. So what we're working with is this idea of having an introductory page that actually you could toggle through these different projected jobs. And what you see is they're broken out by many different types of jobs. The toggle would go down and show more, and you see the projected for 2028. Obviously, this data was before COVID, so we have to be mindful of that, and we'd want to update it. But it also then breaks it out by typically what you need to know for a job is your education levels that are required, and then the occupations themselves and what they pay. And so what you see there is something, as an example, I want to just talk through real briefly, and then we'll end it, is that I highlighted production planning and expediting clerks, which if you're not familiar with that job, the description shorthand is to coordinate and expedite the flow of work and materials within or between departments of an establishment according to production schedule. So where is the green in that? Well, not necessarily a green job per se, but it is something that in the green economy, in the clean energy economy, you would see people in that position. I point that out because one of the things that's important for us to think about is, while solar installer is very clear, there is a lot in the clean energy world that is not tagged necessarily as a clean energy job. And so from other work we've done in the past, looking at different areas or segments of the economy, we've recognized, and the Brookings Institution methodology tries to identify how you can sort of say what percentage of people in production planning and expediting might be in green economy for your local, clean energy economy for your local economy. So we're trying to recognize that when we account for this, we recognize that we can't count everyone in this field and say they're all in the clean energy economy. But what you have to recognize is that these jobs are there. And so for people who may be interested in transitioning or if you want to look at the kind of skills that are needed for that, this tool can help with that as well. So if you go to the next slide, what we really wanted to do was to hone in and sort of drill down on some key things. And for people who are trying to develop a career path, or get into an entry job, it's really understanding your skills and abilities. As you saw on the previous slide, the example I gave didn't even require a bachelor's degree. It just required a high school or an equivalent. And so here you have people who may not have to do a lot of things in terms of higher education, for example. And don't get me wrong, I'm a professor. I have nothing wrong with higher education, but we know it can take time to get into a field. And so how do you start to look at, obviously, building up skills and helping people get rapidly attached or appropriately rapidly attached to workforce? And so what we do here is that for each of those occupations, then we identify the color coding on the right-hand side, talks about the abilities, and the coloring, again, on the right-hand side, talks about tech skills. And so what you see in this occupation itself, it has a set number of abilities that are needed, in terms of deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning, and such, going down the line, information ordering and such, and then the particular skills. So now you can start to think about what skills you may already have if you're looking for new work or looking for, looking to transition, but also then what you need to develop. And again, from like a workforce development side, we'd hope that this would be helpful to think about that as well. And so if we go, not to spend too much more time on that, but I think just this is the idea as we're moving this forward. Again, this is interactive, so you'll be able to pull this out. And the idea is that you can look at it from the abilities side and say, what abilities do I have, for example, or what skills do I have and what jobs might be possible? And knowing that it's not as simple as that to plug yourself into, but nonetheless, we think that it could be a useful tool. And so again, we're trying to have conversations now with folks. So if there's anybody in this meeting who would love to talk to us afterwards, I think it'd be really great. Just let me know and I will respond. So I think, yeah, you can go to the last slide and we're saying thank you. So there's my email at the bottom, and anything we can help with, we're here, at least for another year. We have to get refunded, we hope. We're done.
All right. Thank you very much. Any last call for questions, comments? We're getting some good chatter in the chat box. Interest, very cool. Okay. Thinking about some links to what some other organizations are working on. So thank you, everyone, for participating there.
John Furr, I see. I will reach out to you, and I see Lindsay Barrett, and then I see Irene. Irene, great. Lindsay Burt, excuse me, I said your name incorrectly.
Great.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Moving on. Do we have Kelly on the line?
You do. Good morning.
Good morning. So our next session here on the agenda is a conversation around climate change and thinking about what's going on in the Seattle region. So very lucky to have Kelly.
Okay, I think we lost audio from Jason there for a minute, but Kelly, feel free to get started. Kelly McGorty is the Director of Transportation Planning with the Puget Sound Regional Council, which is the MPO for the Seattle region. So we're really looking forward to hearing your presentation. Thank you for being with us.
All right, thank you, and thank you for saying that, because I'm never sure on these systems if I'm the one that's freezing or if all of you are freezing. So I will just start talking then. Well, thanks so much for inviting me, and I'm going to talk about pretty much the various facets of our climate change work programming. And so let's just dive in. So Brian, are you running my slides for me?
My colleague Tony is.
Okay, perfect. Next slide, please. So I was already queued up. So I'm Kelly McGurdy. I'm the Director of Transportation Planning here at PSRC, and I also have our agency's air quality and climate change portfolios under my work program, partly because of the tie to transportation and partly because that's my background. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are an MPO similar to CMAP. I think you guys might be a little bit larger than we are. We have 4 counties. We have about 100 member agencies, both from cities, towns, transits, ports, the state. And we are now over 4 million people and continuing to grow. We have a Growth Management Act here in Washington State, which I'll elaborate on in a moment. But because of that, we have kind of three tiers plus at our agency. We do growth management planning. We have the Economic Development District that's now within our purview, transportation planning, and then of course we also have a really robust data department. They're actually the largest department here at PSRC. And as I think this is very similar to you, we also distribute federal transportation funds from the Highway Administration and the Transit Administration. Next slide, please. So I'm going to touch briefly on several pieces of these. I won't go in depth because I know I don't have that much time with you this morning, but we've been working on climate here at PSRC since about 2008, and it's certainly evolved over those years. So it's grounded within our policy framework, both for our visioning document, which I'll talk about in a moment, our regional transportation plan, as well as our funding process. It's embedded into all of the analyses we do, and I'll talk about that a little bit in more detail as well. And then the last one is partnerships, because we have a number of activities going on throughout the region where we're partnering with various of our regional, local, and state partner agencies that might be of interest to you as you're moving forward on this topic. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that Washington State has a Growth Management Act, and as the regional transportation planning organization for the state, we have a role because of our size in growth management planning. So Vision 2050 was just adopted last October. It is our overarching policy framework it's pretty much the underpinnings of everything that we do. And this is what guides how we grow, and it covers a wide variety of sectors. The regional transportation plan is considered the transportation arm of Vision. We don't update Vision on a regular basis. The last one we did was Vision 2040, which was adopted in 2008. So this is something that has it's a very big effort to go through, and it sticks around for a while. Vision lays out a regional growth strategy, so we are trying to compress growth into our centers and our urban areas and around high capacity transit communities. It has goals, policies, and actions, and you can see the sectors there. So under GMA, we're responsible for developing multi-county planning policies for the region. Those multi-county planning policies then influence the countywide planning policies that are adopted through countywide comprehensive plans, and then trickle down into local comprehensive plans. And we have a role of certifying the transportation element of local agency comprehensive plans. So that is pretty much the one stick that we have. Because we certify the transportation element, we obviously ensure that the policy framework gets carried through into local comprehensive plans, but we also tie that to our funding process and as well into our transportation improvement program. Agencies must have certified comprehensive plans through us before they're eligible to compete for funding and before they're even eligible to put dollars into the ongoing 4-year TIP. Next slide, please. So just talking a little bit further now about climate. As I mentioned, we've been working on climate since 2008. It really, as we were updating our vision document to Vision 2050, prior to the pandemic, we were a rapidly growing region. I'm sure you all had heard some of the news articles about Seattle's growth. And climate is a very big topic here in the region. And so while Vision, the previous version of Vision, which was out to 2040, addressed climate, in Vision 2050, we were directed to really take it more seriously and make it more of a foundational piece throughout the document. So it is its own chapter. You can see the climate goal in front of you. Some of our member jurisdictions, as well as our Clean Air Agency for the region, have adopted goals and targets. And so since the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency mirrors our borders, the board has decided to align our work with their climate goals. Throughout the multiple sectors throughout the document, climate is referenced both in terms of emissions and mitigation, and this includes things like energy conservation, alternative fuels, as well as a big push for electrification of the transportation system. We are also, because vision is not updated on a regular basis, but the regional transportation plan is, I'll talk in a moment about our 4-part greenhouse gas strategy, but vision kind of embedded the fact that we're going to take a look at this on a regular basis. And since we have the opportunity with the 4-year update cycle of the RTP, we will continue to address and monitor how the region is doing towards reducing emissions of climate. The third bullet calls for us to do a climate wedge analysis. And this is, I've been joking that this is entirely my fault because we've had some confusion and just kind of a disconnect in explaining, you know, the state goals, the regional goals, the local goals are sector-wide, or, you know, full sector, economy-wide, whereas the work that we really do when we track emissions is tailpipe emissions. They are tailpipe emissions as they are influenced by land use patterns, but we're not estimating emissions from the electricity sector or from buildings or from waste. And so aligning our analytics to these broader goals has been sometimes really challenging to explain. So I got myself caught into that web and agreed to go ahead and do a full economy-wide, all sector analysis. So we are in a partnership project, which I'll talk about in a moment, to really try to place the work that we do in transportation and land use into that full spectrum so that we can begin tracking, you know, truly the region-wide emissions. Lastly, vision also calls for us to continue to work on preparedness and resilience, which is less of a robust work program, but I have a slide coming up where we talk about that a little bit more detail. Next slide, please. So our climate work really kind of started here with our 4-part greenhouse gas strategy. The prior version of vision did have some fairly high level policies related to climate, but at that time, things were really just, the conversations around climate were really just starting, and particularly at the MPO level, there hadn't been a lot of work going on. So around 2010, as part of our regional transportation plan, we did this research and we adopted a 4-part greenhouse gas strategy, which is really embedded in the areas of influence that we have. So land use, vision has a regional growth strategy. It has been updated over time, but the land use box is really implementing vision and implementing that compact growth pattern around transit. And then the other three boxes really relate to the transportation system. So the transportation choices, this was really acknowledging that we need to discourage single occupancy vehicle travel and encourage multimodal options. And within our transportation plan, particularly the most recent one that was adopted in 2018, we have a regional integrated transit network. And we have a pretty aggressive assumption of expanded transit service. We are, COVID aside, we are an expanding transit network here in the region. We have about 7 transit agencies, and for the first time in 2018, they all had developed long-range plans. So we were able to really come up with this integrated network. We also have an active transportation plan and a big push for bicycle and pedestrian facilities. And numerous other things. So providing transportation choices was really building off of the work of the RTP. Similarly, user fees. We recognize that for a variety of reasons, we have some pricing assumptions in our regional transportation plan. And we also recognize that it's not just about revenue generation, it is a demand management tool. And depending on how you adjust that lever, you can really provide greater emission reductions. And so we've evolved over the years from full system tolling. Now in our current regional transportation plan, we have some express toll lanes and highway tolls, and then a gradual transition in the out year to a road usage charge. And again, depending on how tightly that lever is set, that can have a real impact on reducing emissions. And then lastly, technology. So when we first developed this strategy back into 2010, we hadn't had updated CAFE standards as of yet. Things had really been kind of like, it was really a what if. So we had come up with two scenarios at that time, one which we called what could be likely in terms of fuels and fleets out to 2040. And then we had something that was a bit more aggressive. And I distinctly remember folks looking at me like I was crazy when I came up with some of those aggressive options. But now that's really panned out with the efforts that have happened over the last decade. That aggressive scenario is really now just kind of embedded in the strategy. So we are not at this stage continuing to come up with those scenarios now, because so many of these things are grounded in Vision 2050. They're really kind of grounded in all of the other policy framework related to the impact of pricing, the impact of land use, as well as electrification. Now we're really more in a continuous monitoring phase for the strategy and really moving towards implementation of the assumptions we have in here rather than coming up with, you know, what's next. So this is something that we will continue to incorporate into our planning work. We will update our analysis every 4 years as part of the RTP. And I can talk a moment about some of the implementation items that we're doing. Next slide, please. So we're in the thick of it. This is an ongoing work program for us. The first bullet I mentioned early on, some of the partnerships that we're doing. We routinely provide the transportation data, both from VMT, but also emissions, to a variety of folks when they're working on developing greenhouse gas inventories, including our regional partners at the Clean Air Agency. But we had an opportunity recently, and we're just getting underway now. We are able to partner with some of our larger counties and cities, as well as the Clean Air Agency, on the next version of this inventory. And then when they reached out to us to participate in that, we realized we can go a little bit further that then aligns with some of the things that Vision called for us to do, and in two ways. One is to really, this is my opportunity to get some support for that full economy-wide spectrum of the climate wedge analysis and really get some up-to-date information on the state of the practice and what's going on with all those other sectors. And two, I don't know if this is similar in your area, but in our area, there is a lot of activism around airports, airport expansions and airport emissions. And this is not an area that we have a lot of expertise in, but it is an area that we're getting called on more to do and acknowledge and address emissions from aviation. And so we're taking the opportunity with this partnership project and the RFP, we'll be reviewing the proposals for that shortly, an opportunity to go deeper into aviation emissions than we've done before. As I mentioned, we are updating our regional transportation plan right now. It's scheduled to be adopted next spring in 2022. So as I mentioned, we'll continue to monitor and update that 4-part greenhouse gas strategy. We'll be weaving in the updated regional growth strategy from Vision 2050, and then continuing to work on our transportation investments. And the analysis of emissions is a really key performance metric for us. The board has adopted certain regional outcomes that they care about, and these include safety, jobs, a number of things, and emissions is a big one for those. And so we will continue to report out on those emissions. And to the extent possible, we are doing our best to go more granular. Just coming up with one regional number is not super impactful to most folks. They like us to go deeper, whether it's county-wide or quarter-wide. So we continue to work on that as well. In terms of implementation, I've been working on electric vehicles and alternative fuels ever since we first developed the greenhouse gas strategy back in 2010. But now this is really gaining momentum. It's now grounded in Vision. And a few years back, again, with some partner agencies, we decided, well, let's all work together on this and have the same assumptions, kind of try to steer the ship together. And so we have what we're now calling a regional electric vehicle collaboration. It's at this stage, it's really just a forum. We've had 3 events to date. The first one was very introductory, kind of getting the feel of where is everyone in terms of, some of our agencies are very invested and really aggressive at pursuing this. Other of our agencies, this is just one more thing that they're going to have to do. So we are just trying to bring people together, understanding what do they need from us to help advance this, whether that's building codes, ordinances, how do they address this in the comp plan process, how do they fund this. The most recent one we just held in February, I believe, was electrifying your comp plan, because we are in a unique position right now, bridging between our vision document and updated policies and the comprehensive plan update process, which is due in 2024. So we are with this RTP and this time frame right now, we are coming at it hard in terms of providing the best data and guidance we possibly can. So the regional electric vehicle collaboration, it's an opportunity to bring folks together, ask questions, identify best practices, and we're working to develop with our Clean Air Agency partner an online clearinghouse where we can start to post some of this information. And for all of the climate work that we're doing, we are tasked with providing as much guidance and resources to our member agencies as they update their comprehensive plans as we can. Next slide, please. So I wanted to just briefly touch on this. I didn't know if this was something that you were as interested in, but I wanted to at least note that we also have emissions reduction and climate in our project selection processes for our federal funds. I won't read through all of this, but essentially we do have competitive processes for all of our dollars, and it's about, I always lose sight of the numbers. We probably have about 600 million or so, 500, 600 million of Federal Transit Administration dollars a year, and probably around $100 million of highway funds a year. We do our project selection process every 2 years. And our project selection process is definitely rooted in vision policies. We have a policy focus to support the regional and local centers and the corridors that serve them. The project evaluation criteria I won't run through because I'm sure it's quite similar to the way that you folks do things there. Next slide, please. And again, this is probably not news to you either, but we have emissions reduction in the criterion for every funding source. So not just our CMAQ dollars, but for every process that we do, we have this included in there. Obviously, for transportation projects, we're looking at the various ways that transportation projects can reduce emissions. And we really come at this at treating greenhouse gases as another pollutant. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. The same things that will reduce some of the other emissions from these traditional transportation projects will also do a great job towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide, please. So, but a couple of things I wanted to note, which I thought you might find of interest. So we, PSRC, without going into the nitty-gritty details of our project selection process, PSRC staff, we estimate the emissions reduction potential from every project. And we built this system, and this has been a years-long process to educate our member jurisdictions about why certain types of projects score well under the air quality and climate criterion and why certain projects don't. And we finally kind of broken through that barrier. We produced a guidance tool, a guidance document, but we also have used a project level emissions tool for years. And once we updated that not too long ago, and once we did that and made it public, it really helped them understand why they would be seeing some of the scores that they would be seeing. I would have to argue so often with them, but I've got a great project. This is, I'm going to be doing good things. You absolutely are. It's just not a huge emission reducer from, when you're comparing to expanded light rail networks, for example. But within this tool, we analyze a number of pollutants. But when we use when we apply the score, we've opted to take CO2 and fine particulates as kind of our representative pollutants in the scoring process. It's not a super scientific way of applying the score, but it was a good way of, one, analyzing all of the pollutants from each of these projects, but also bringing in climate. Next slide, please. And I've talked about some of this already, but the resource guide and bringing in the information from the years worth of CMAQ emissions reports that we've done on projects, but also sharing the tool and showing how, the very detailed inputs provided by them as project sponsors. And we go through project by project and we ask them to provide certain information depending on the type of the project. And then with the tool, they can actually see how that plays out in terms of exporting the final emissions. So it was just it's been a long road to get here, but it was a really valuable education tool for our sponsors to understand how different types of projects impact emissions. And the next slide, which is my last slide. I wanted to also just briefly touch on the resilience planning we do. And this is something that's near and dear to my heart, but it's also not a very robust work program, to be honest, that we've developed. We started back in the 2010 Regional Transportation Plan. We developed a white paper on, at the time we were using the term adaptation. And I've been doing this long enough that whether it's adaptation, preparedness, or resilience, we've kind of bucketed that under one umbrella. But we started with a white paper. We also did some sea level rise mapping at that time. And over the years in the 2014 plan, we updated that. And the 2018, we had some other opportunities. We had an opportunity to work with some collaboratives, preparedness collaboratives around the country. And again, with some of our partner agencies, we decided to go ahead and form a climate preparedness collaborative here in our region. And this has been several years. It's been limping along somewhat because I think, not that folks don't care about it, we had a board session where we asked them to talk about climate resilience and hazard resilience in general, and they had a lot of interest in it. My sense from it is that, yes, they wanted us to be leaders in it, but also recognize they had other things that were going to take their priority. So it is a bit of a make the case, so to speak. So it's taken a while to get this off the ground. Right now, I don't know how many members we have signed on, but the goal is to just keep bringing in jurisdictions as members, and it's really about again, providing resources, providing best practices, providing that forum where folks can share with each other and potentially leverage resources so that they can tackle this topic together. Another opportunity we had was through the National Academies of Sciences several years back. They had something going on called the Resilient America Roundtable, and they had reached out to us, and we spent some time with them working on some information related. In our region, our focus was on equity. So the outcome of that hasn't really changed our work program or impacted our work program, but it was very helpful just in terms of elevating the topic at our board and our member jurisdictions, as well as just educating us more about the various aspects of resilience. So the collaborative is ongoing. We are also, as part of this RTP, we had an intern with us last summer to work on a regional hazards web map. And it was an interesting conversation with our member jurisdictions, as probably the same with your areas. They all have their own hazards mitigation work and emergency management work. But we were told pretty clearly, because I was asking, well, what can we do? How is this going to be useful if you all already have this information? But similar to the conversations we often hear from land use planners and public works staff, they don't necessarily talk to each other. And so having a resource at the regional level where that folks can go was deemed of value. So we were working on developing a web map that it's very simplistic. This is nothing groundbreaking in any way, but it's just bringing in all the information. And so particularly for our smaller jurisdictions who neither have the staff or the expertise to do this, they can at least go in and have the beginning foundations to start talking about what are some of the hazards in their region, and as they're updating their comprehensive plan, what are some of the things that they might be addressing. And we'll be working with our collaborative, again, to provide some guidance and best practices as all of our member jurisdictions are updating their comp plans. And with that, go ahead and go to the next slide. My contact information is up there, but I really appreciate you inviting me, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right, thank you, Kelly. Any questions from the group? All right, Kelly put her contact information in the slide, which again will be made available to everyone. So thank you very much for that. Our last session before other business and public comment, Austin is going to take us through a summary of COVID-19's impacts in northeastern Illinois. Austin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So this is all spelled out in a memo that's available on our website. I'm adding the link into the chat now. So there are, of course, a lot of numbers going to be thrown at you in the next few minutes, but if you see something that strikes your interest, I encourage you to go to the memo and look a little bit closer. So as Brian and Tony and our colleague Kate and I were sort of thinking through the meeting for today, we both wanted to have a forward-looking part of the meetings. We're thinking about how we can bring green jobs, green economy back in the recovery, and then also thinking about our role as an MPO and where we can be pushing forward on some of the economic and environmental priorities as a transportation and programming agency. But then, of course, particularly as we have sort of stumbled across the 1 year mark with the pandemic, we also wanted to take an opportunity to look back at some of the economic impacts that have been affecting our region. Of course, getting a really fine-grained local data on the job market and small business effects has been very difficult over the past year. And as we get a little bit farther out and can get a little bit more perspective on the recovery, we start to have increasing amounts of data available to us. So I won't say that I will touch on everything that has been affected by the pandemic. That could be a very long list indeed, but we wanted to sort of cover some of the main areas that we've been looking at. So broadly speaking, the U.S. economy officially entered a brief, sharp recession in February 2020. The recession probably ended sometime over the summer. We'll see what's officially declared. But as it went on, it was pretty clear that almost everyone was affected in the initial days of the pandemic, but over time that effect became increasingly concentrated among people of color, the leisure and hospitality sector, and small businesses. Looking forward, private sector and government forecasters generally agree that the U.S. economy will see strong economic growth in 2021 and into 2022. But of course, that's going to be different paths for different areas and for different people. And so a lot of it is going to be driven really by fundamentals like industry mix, education levels, and racial equity. At CMAP, we've really sort of looked at the pandemics as being more likely to accelerate existing trends in the economy rather than reversing trends that had 20, 30 years of momentum behind them. So we can go to the next slide. The biggest effect has really been felt in the labor market. The U.S. economy saw record-setting declines and record-setting gains in 2020. At one point in April, the metropolitan Chicago area had shed approximately 645,000 jobs off of its January levels, so employment dropped about 15% in just 3 months. The job market stabilized somewhat over the summer as businesses and consumers both adapted to public health conditions. But that recovery then weakened again with the onset of winter and a resurgence of the virus. In January of this year, the 7 counties remained about 8.5% off their highs the year before. So we still have a good amount of progress to make. And as we are coming out of winter, I would hope to see these numbers improve again. But the real concern here is that we're lagging behind Midwestern and national averages for a whole host of reasons. Altogether, we have regained about 43% of the jobs lost in 2020. So like I said, we've made real progress from those dark days of March and April, but there's work still to be done. The same point on unemployment, I don't think it's necessary to show the charts. We've all seen them time and again. Unemployment peaked at 17%, only to settle down to about 8.3% in December. I think particularly concerning for us here in the region is that unemployment ticked up again in January. So we're right now standing at about 8.9%. Of course, that is concentrated in different populations, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But that 8.9% is roughly on trend with different parts of the country. Los Angeles is at 11.5%, New York 9.6%. The large metropolitan economies are really leading the nation compared to a U.S. average of about 6.3%. And that U.S. average 6.3 seems ambitious. Well, it seems actually quite good compared to, say, 3 or 4 years ago, prior to our redefinition of what full employment looks like at 3 or 4%. So again, we have made significant progress, but the labor market really still remains quite impaired. And we'll have to see over the coming days how that continues to decline into the spring. I also wanted to mention unemployment claims. So last month, or in the first week of March, 57,000 Illinois workers filed an initial claim for unemployment insurance. That's about 6.5 times as many as the same week a year prior. Of course, we could all spend the afternoon talking about the deep challenges and inequities in our unemployment insurance system, but that tally still offers a leading indicator of where we think the economy and the labor market might be heading in the days ahead. So having 57,000 Illinois workers filing a first-time unemployment claim is still quite concerning. If we think back to the 2007-2009 recession, the worst days of the Great Recession saw about 34,000 weekly claims in January of 2009. So 34,000 to 57,000, we are still seeing a great deal of instability for workers across the state. And of course, we can move to the next slide. We know that the U.S. economy often operates on a last hired, first fired basis, and that vulnerable populations are often the last to see the benefits of an economic expansion, the first to feel the impacts of a wider downturn. We don't have access to official unemployment numbers by race and ethnicity, by disability status, or by gender on a local level, but there are preliminary annual averages for unemployment for the state of Illinois. So if we think about over that sort of spike, that roller coaster of unemployment in 2020, what sort of the average unemployment rates for different populations? And we see that unemployment really was concentrated among young workers, people of color, and women. So, for example, the unemployment rate for those who are 20 to 24 is about 18%. That then sort of declines slightly for Latino and Black women, around 12.5%, compared to 9.1% for the state as a whole, and then 7.8% for white men. Again, all of these numbers are available in the memo that I linked to, so you can look a little bit closer. But it shows the real disparities in who's being affected by the pandemic, both in terms of geography, which parts of the region are being affected, which parts of the state, and then also in terms of industry and occupations. We know that segregation across industries and occupations has had a big effect on who's seeing the impacts of the pandemic. The other part I wanted to mention, you can go to the next slide, Tony, is looking at labor force participation rates. So about 137,000 fewer workers were looking for work or working compared to January 2020. That's about 3.2%. So we know that labor force participation rates in the state have been declining for several years. So this table outlines 2010, 2019, and 2020. It's part of a larger shift in our economy as we face sort of certain economic challenges and demographic shifts. We have an aging workforce that may be seeing more retirements, as well as previous CMAP analysis has shown that lower income workers and people of color who are working age, young families in particular, have been leaving the region to go to other metropolitan areas in search of economic opportunity. So there are a lot of different factors at play in what might be driving this labor force participation, but we see pretty sharp declines over the past year in particular. So I'll just point out the 4.5% drop for Black workers in particular, as we see different people leaving the labor market out of concern for their personal well-being during the pandemic, or for a lack of opportunity as labor markets have been impacted. And in particular, I think this really points to the potential for another jobless recovery that could be particularly a slip for the region as a whole if people in places are left on the sidelines. You can go to the next slide, Tony. We also know that the pandemic has affected different industries in different ways, particularly the farther we go on. As I said earlier, almost everyone was affected in March and April as we all sort of struggled to figure out how to work from home. But as the pandemic has ground on, that those impacts have been increasingly concentrated in leisure and hospitality in particular. This chart's a little complicated to look at on first glance. That box in the upper right, 5.9%, is the total non-farm employment change for the U.S. as a whole. And if we use that as a baseline of comparison, of just saying, like, how are we doing both industry by industry and then as a region compared to different parts of the country, where do different industries fall? And in this chart or this table, those in gold have improved sort of above average, and those in blue have really struggled to catch up. And as you look closer, we can see that Houston in particular has been able to outperform the country as a whole, and New York has really struggled to curb their outbreak and also be able to recover jobs across industries. But I think in particular, we should be looking at which industries are being the most impacted, and it really is quite heavily concentrated in leisure and hospitality. Metropolitan Chicago finished 2020 with job recoveries in major industry sectors that more closely reflect national trends, but we are still, like the rest of the nation, missing about 1 in 3 hospitality jobs, compared to about 1 in 50 in trade and transportation and utilities. So as we think about what might have helped to shield us from some of these effects, as you will recall from some of CMAP's prior analysis on export-oriented industries, those traded clusters that we spent a good amount of time talking about a 1.5, 2 years ago, we have the most diversified large U.S. economy, and because of that, we have more of our workers, more of our sort of industrial base in export-oriented industries, like I said, goods production, goods movement, business services, finance, and marketing. And that helps to shield us from some of the particular drivers of this recession in particular. We are not as heavily reliant on tourism, on hospitality, on leisure jobs as some of our peers. And we are certainly not immune to business cycles, but the composition of our economy really helps to shield us from some of the effects. That is slightly concerning because those export-oriented jobs have been declining in the region over the last 2 decades. So it's another area of interest for CMAP as we think about what kinds of industries we are investing in and what kinds of industries we want to focus and prioritize during the recovery. You can go to the next slide. One of the major takeaways, I think, over the last year has been that this recession, all indicators at the moment suggest, is not structural, but is quite closely tied to the course of the virus and its impacts on household activities. Consumer spending in Northeastern Illinois is down about 13.5% from a year ago, and the decline is most significant for those discretionary categories and in-person services. Again, hospitality, leisure, entertainment, restaurants. You can see here that restaurants and bars are down about 1/3, entertainment and recreation down about 1/2, and hospitality and travel down about 2/3. That has not been true for all sectors. I mean, grocery stores saw an 11.5% increase as more of us have had to cook at home and sort of taken up bread baking. But it is quite telling about where we need to be spending a lot of our efforts in terms of focusing on recovery. Next slide, please. So the volatility in consumer spending has also fallen hardest on small businesses, which tend to have smaller cash reserves for short-term and emergency expenses. Depending on how you define it, about 73% of the Chicago region's establishments have fewer than 10 employees. So small businesses really are a very large portion of our economy and a large percentage of our businesses. And as these have increasingly adapted to online and takeout sales, there has been some stabilizing and some recovery for small business revenues. But that said, small business revenues in the region are still about 1/3 below the pre-pandemic levels. This ranges across the region. So those gray lines in the background, it would have been too busy to show all of them on the chart, but those are the 7 counties, the state of Illinois, as well as the city of Chicago. And there is some real variation in small business revenues across the region. So in Lake County, small business revenues are down about 18% compared to Kane County, where small business revenues are down about 43%. So thinking about how we can help to get these small businesses open again, how we can help them adapt their business models or where they might need to have greater access to business relief grants and other supports from the government. I think one of the real insights over the next year is going to be how well do some of those supports from the federal government, from the state, from the counties and on down have really supported small businesses. Will be interesting to see how those have played out over time. Next slide, please. Along with small business revenues, there are also small business closures. There are a wide number of reasons why small businesses have needed to close, either due to the drop in consumer demand or out of concern for personal and community well-being. About 1 in 3 small businesses across northeastern Illinois remains closed. And the source for this, Opportunity Insights, and using Wombly data, defines open as having at least one transaction in the last 3 days. So, it might be a little bit of a proxy for what small businesses are actually open or closed. But again, about 1 in 3 are still closed. Going back to where we see the biggest effects in hospitality and leisure, and particularly in restaurants, I would expect that many of these businesses should be able to reopen as conditions improve. There's no good way at the moment to know how many of them are temporarily closed versus permanently closed. And we're going to be thinking about that over the next couple of months as more states work their way out of restrictions. I think in particularly restaurants and those hospitality businesses already see a great deal of business churn in a typical year, and they have a great deal of entrepreneurial energy behind them in normal times. So we should be able to see greater recoveries in those areas than we might have if this were concentrated in other sectors. But that should not minimize the challenges that business owners are going to face and that communities are going to face in trying to think about how to support their small businesses. Next slide, please. As we think about how business owners are also thinking about their own recovery, from the Census Bureau put out a pulse survey that looks at some of small businesses' attitudes and expectations for the year ahead. One of the key questions is thinking about how long will it take you to regain your pre-pandemic operational levels. And what we see is that about half, 47, 48% of small businesses in metropolitan Chicago reported that they would need more than 6 months to recover. That was during the middle of February, just a few weeks ago. That is up pretty substantially from April 2020. So really those dark days of the pandemic, we didn't know what the road ahead looked for us. And at that point, about 38% of small businesses said that it would take 6 months or more to recover. So there is sort of a deepening concern among small businesses and how they think about their own recovery. But I think the larger trend is one of divergence. As the region's economy has stabilized and slowly improved, small businesses have increasingly indicated either greater confidence in their ability to recover or greater concern about their ability to recover. And we're starting to see some real separation around who will be able to, like I said, get back to their levels of operations pre-pandemic. And there's going to be a lot of ongoing research around these impacts in the months ahead. All that being, sort of summarized, there's good reason to expect business activity and job markets to register strong growth in 2021. Business fixed investments are up. Industrial production has seen continued progress. Manufacturers' new orders, particularly for core capital goods, are at an all-time high. And I think anyone who was walking around the city yesterday in the beautiful weather here would see that there's a lot of pent-up demand for getting back to normal and getting back out to some of those leisure and hospitality restaurants. And so as we sort of work our way through lightening restrictions, expanding vaccinations, we should see strong growth in 2021 and 2022. All of that said, of course, we are we are CMAP. We like to keep our eyes towards the horizon and think about longer term trends. So Tony, can you go to the next slide. Northeastern Illinois entered the pandemic with declining population and lagging economic growth. There are sort of broader trends in our economy that we need to be thinking about, particularly as we think about how we want to recover and what some of our priorities might be. Research has shown that natural disasters, social disturbances, these things tend not to have a large effect on long-term growth, particularly for large, well-developed economies. And instead, those, as I said at the top, depend on more fundamental factors like industry mix, educational attainment, and racial equity. But between 2001 and 2019, our gross regional product, the measure of regional economic production, grew at just 0.9% annually. That's about half the national average. And job growth here was just 0.02% annually, less than a third of the national average. So as we think about where our economy was headed prior to the pandemic, things were already sort of on a unfortunate trajectory. I think as you also look at some of these gross regional product measures, we already see that the sort of prior expansion, that decade-long growth following the Great Recession, was slowing. It was decelerating, both for large metropolitan economies and then for the U.S. overall. And then, as I said earlier, part of what has helped shield our economy is the broad composition of industries that we have here, how our export-oriented industries help to sort of buffer some of the effects of the pandemic. But jobs in export-oriented industries have continued to decline as a share of our total employment from about 42% in 2001 to 37% in 2020. So sort of this long-term erosion, some of those competitive strengths that help to buffer us from business cycles. That's about 170,000 jobs in export-oriented industries over that time period. Like many other metropolitan economies, ours has continued to sort of shift to more service-based direction, but related job gains have not made up entirely for the decline in middle-skill, middle-wage manufacturing jobs. So again, as we're thinking both in terms of the recovery over the next year or two, or 3 or 4, as well as some of the policy priorities for long-term planning, thinking about how we continue to support industries that can be a source of growth. Next slide, please. The main driver for us in particular is looking for sources of talent-driven growth in particular. Nearly half of residents over the age of 25 have an associate's degree or higher, including more than 2.4 million workers with a bachelor's degree. Education and training providers, I think, will be all too happy to share their challenges over the past year as they've been trying to adapt to deliver those services in the middle of a pandemic. Data show overall college enrollment for Illinois this past semester was down about 4.8% from the year before, so about 5% of decline in college enrollment. That's compared to 2.5% nationally. So we're running about twice the decline as a nation overall. And that's really heavily driven by a 13% decline in first-time freshman enrollment and a 21% decline among two-year public colleges. So as we think again about some of the community colleges in our region and their challenges in delivering education and training, what are some of the strategies that we need to be pursuing to make sure that we're maintaining our human capital for the long term? There are a lot of reasons that have sort of fed into the decline in student enrollment. I think in particular, the concerns over in-person instruction, affordability, and the benefits of remote learning. I would be optimistic that as the pandemic recedes, that we might see some of the more normal jumps in enrollment that we tend to see during recessions, as some of those new added concerns are addressed coming out of the pandemic. Next slide, please. part of our human capital and the historically low unemployment rates prior to the recession, they also helped to drive median household incomes quite high in the last 3 years of the last expansion. So between 2016 and 2019, household incomes jumped about 13%. In a really tight labor market, those have helped to lift wages. And it is, I think, a particularly cruel irony that many of the people who were beginning to see the benefits of a long economic expansion were also the ones who were the first to feel the hit of job losses during the pandemic. These are meaningful gains for U.S. households, but again, we've seen a decline in the share of middle-skill, middle-wage jobs in our economy in particular. So there are some real risks underlying the otherwise rosy outlook for household incomes. I think from all indications, one of the main priorities from federal officials, Federal Reserve Board in particular, is looking at using more inclusive measures of full employment and wages in order to think about how some of those more macroeconomic policies are going to unfold over the next couple of years. So, and I think it's going to be a question for the CMAP region in particular to think about what are some of the structural reforms that we need to be making in our economy to make sure that we are driving more household income towards different populations. Last slide, please, Tony. Of course, underlying all of this, one of the major backdrops is the persistent disparities in our economy. There are really endless measures that we could use to demonstrate the racial and ethnic gaps in our economy. One of the numbers I rely on most heavily is that Black households in the Chicago region earn just 46 cents for every dollar earned by the typical white household. That was true before the pandemic, and the pandemic likely only worsened these inequalities. We know that there are some particularities to the pandemic that have concentrated on people of color and areas of color in our region, but these effects far predate the pandemic itself. And they're really the effect of persistent discrimination, disinvestment, and segregation. And one of the major pieces that came out of 2050 were sort of demonstrating that these disparities are self-defeating and sort of undermining our future economic growth. So as more data becomes available on a local level, CMAP will continue, of course, to analyze the state of our economy and how well it is serving different populations across the region. And with that, I think we will close up here. I'm happy to answer any questions. Like I said at the beginning, all of the numbers, all of the data crunching and analysis is available in the memo that I linked on our website. I encourage you to really dive in and see where we are 1 year after the pandemic.
Excellent. Thanks, Austin. We have a couple of minutes for any questions that you may have. Group? All right. Hearing none, thank you, Austin, for that. Is there any other business that needs to be covered at today's meeting? All right, Austin, do we have any public comment?
I have not seen any. Brian or Tony?
I have not received any either. In here, none.
Hopefully in the coming months, we'll be able to meet in person again, and it will be a little bit easier for the public to join these meetings.
Okay, next meeting for environmental and natural resources is set for May 6th. The next meeting for the Economic Development Committee is set for June 28th. Any other comments for the good and welfare of the combined group? All right, hearing none, thank you everyone for your participation today. A lot of good information. Thank you CMAP and CMAP staff, as well as our external guests for your comments today. I know CMAP is always open to our comments and suggestions for future topics. And if there is nothing else from the group, we will call this meeting closed, effective 11/25. Thank you very much. Have a great day.